Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to the second session of the day. So today we're going to be discussing accessibility and usability and how those aspects of our digital work have been impacted or changed by the massive impact of the coronavirus pandemic. And we're also going to be giving you a few tips for you to take away to make your research, design and testing processes more user-friendly. And we will be taking Q&A at the end of the session. So if you guys want to add your questions to the Q&A box rather than the chat box, that way we can see them all. They won't get lost in the chat. Okay, let me just progress these slides. Yeah, it's not letting me. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so feel free to tweet, add your questions to the Q&A box, and we'll have a nice Q&A at the end of the session. So let's start with some introductions. So we have a few members of the Jadu creative team here on the webinar today. Me first, I guess. My name is Jack Nyland. I'm a user experience designer here at Jadu Creative. And as a user experience designer, I specialize in the usability and accessibility of the designs that we create for you. So Jadine, if you want to go next.
Yep, so hi, I'm Jadine. I'm a user experience designer at Jadu Creative, and I'll be talking about the importance of user research and how we're adapting research post-COVID. Over to you, Ed.
Yeah, morning everyone. My name's Ed and I'm a user experience graphic web designer. So I'll be going through some tips later on how to design for accessibility. And over to Luke.
Hi everyone, I'm Luke. I'm a software tester at Jadu Creative. I've been here just over a year. And for my session later, we're going to be going over screen readers and why testing on them is so important. So back to you, Jack.
Okay, thanks everybody. So in our session, we're going to be focusing on three key areas of accessibility and usability and how COVID has impacted them. So first off, we're going to talk about research, and we're going to do that with Jadine, and then we're going to move on to the design portion with Ed, and then testing with Luke. But first, we're going to look at a quick example. So if you want to go to the next slide. So audio tweets. I don't know if anybody has heard of this piece of functionality. So this is something that went live on Twitter a few weeks ago. So this was similar to if you use WhatsApp, you can hit the microphone and you can send like a voice recording. So it's a similar sort of concept for tweets. So you hit record, make a little spiel or something, and then hit send, and your audio tweet would go out there. But there was one big problem with this audio tweets. You want to go to the next slide? Yeah. So they weren't accessible. It's a big problem. So deaf people had no way of accessing the audio tweet if they couldn't hear it. So unless the user wrote a transcript for the audio tweet, which sort of defeats the purpose of the functionality in the first place, there was no way for deaf people to access this content. So in response to this criticism, because they had a lot of criticism through their own platform, Twitter admitted that they hadn't considered the accessibility for deaf people at any point during the research, the design, or the testing of this feature. So this sort of huge lack of consideration for accessibility basically forced Twitter to go back to the drawing board with this new functionality. So essentially wasted a massive amount of time and money for the company. So yeah, if we want to hit over to the next slide, that example shows the dangers of not properly engaging with accessibility during each phase of your digital work. So throughout the research, where you're sort of finding out what your users need and planning your new product, to the actual design of it, so constructing how the functionality will work, and then the testing of it. You need to consider the accessibility at each stage here, Otherwise, you're going to have a problem, like we've seen there with the Twitter example. So today we're going to talk through our process a bit, give you a bit of insight into what we do and how we make those considerations. So hopefully we can help you guys, help your users, and maybe give you a few tips that you can use yourself. So first up, we're going to talk about user research with Jadine. So Jadine, first of all, what is user research?
So the research itself can take many forms, but essentially it's a way to ensure that your digital offering meets the needs of your users. So by engaging users before and during the design process, as we spoke about earlier, we can ensure that the products that go live are fit for purpose, and you don't get any nasty surprises like in the Twitter audio tweets example.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, so if we go to the next slide. Why is it important? So here at Jadu Creative, we have a whole host of different research methods that we employ at different stages of your project. We can engage members of the public with online surveys, questionnaires, and in-depth interviews. And we also do user testing where we can run through tasks on your website, test the navigation and taxonomies, or even use eye tracking technology. We then analyze the findings to give you actionable results to improve the usability and accessibility of your sites. And we also run workshops, so your staff and stakeholders at various different points in our projects, they can get involved with all of this too.
Yeah, so those workshops that we run, they can be made up of sort of gathering requirements from you and your staff, but we also make a bit of an effort to pass on how we conduct our researches on a wider sort of level so that we can pass that knowledge on to the staff. And we're currently running all of those remotely, which has been interesting. Because in the past, we would obviously come on site for a lot of this sort of work, sort of face-to-face, but we can't do that now. But yeah.
No, definitely. Workshops were a big concern for a lot of creative companies when lockdown hit because they were not familiar with how to run them remotely. But here at Jadu Creative, we've already been running remote workshops for years with our Australian clients and even some within the UK. So we were not impacted as much by this, and neither were our clients. Yeah,
definitely. Loads of the tools we use for sort of online collaborative workshops, like you say, that we've been doing with the international clients, those tools obviously just easily sort of slot into our workflow with UK clients. So it's not really phased us at all in that respect, the pandemic. But some clients might be wondering how user testing might be impacted. So if clients have had user testing with us before or haven't, basically a lot of the user testing that we do is face-to-face with real people in your locations. So often we would do that in council offices or public libraries. We'd sit with members of the public, run through websites with them, question them about different aspects of the council website or a specific piece of functionality. So all of that was face-to-face. So people might be wondering how we are managing that now. What, do you want to sort of go into that a little bit, JD?
Yeah, so much of our user experience research is work that can be done completely remotely anyway. So that should solve the concerns that some of the customers may have. So things such as online questionnaires, surveys, interviews that we could do face-to-face through methods such as Zoom, they can all be really helpful. But we have had to rethink some of our user testing. So in the past, we've tested members of the public face-to-face, but due to the pandemic, we have adapted some of our online workshop knowledge into remote user testing. So as I mentioned, by using Zoom, we're able to have one-to-one sessions with users in which we can ask them to complete tasks on your website or prototype. And there's actually a lot of benefits to doing things in this way because the user, they're now at home, so they're a lot more comfortable and likely to behave more naturally. And we can record the whole session to be analysed by our research team later.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point about how they behave more naturally. Sometimes when we're doing user testing with users, sort of, no matter how many times we say to them, like, we're not testing you, we're testing the product, they will still feel like they're being tested, and they'll want to please you. They'll want to do what they think is the right thing for the test.
Absolutely.
That takes it a bit away because they're just sat at home, so they can feel a bit more comfortable. They're on their own machine, all that sort of stuff. So the next question I have, although we've sort of covered this quite a lot, but I just want to talk about why research is important in the process. Because obviously we have that process that is very ingrained at Jadu Creative, which is research, design, and then build, and then test. Some sort of creative companies that you talk to, they'll go straight in with design. They'll sort of have a look at what you got now, they'll tweak it a bit, they'll put something fresh. So what would you say is the reason that the research stage is just so important there?
Well, without user research, we run that risk of missing the mark on what a user of a particular website needs. And it's really important to understand what they're looking for, so we can structure the site in a way that it's accessible and it promotes a good user experience for them. And accessibility is particularly important with public sector websites and mobile applications, as it will soon be a legal requirement to meet the international WCAG 2.1 AA accessibility standards. So it's just really important.
Yeah. I think, are we on to the next slide now?
Yeah. Also, financially, it makes sense to build this work at the start of a project, as we saw how it was really costly if it was to go back for Twitter to try and go back and clean up the mistakes that it made with the audio tweets.
Exactly. That almost, a lot of that work, they have to sort of rip it up and start again.
Yeah.
So that cost implication is a lot more than we just thought about it.
And it's something that could be avoided.
Yeah, definitely. Could we go to the next slide? So when should we be doing research? Okay, that's a good question. So we've talked about it a bit at the start of the project as a sort of linear process. Mm-hmm. But at any point we should be doing research. What do you think, Jadu?
Well, user research is something that's ongoing. But I'd say that it's most vital at the start of your redesign project, because user research can be done, as you said, it can be done at various stages during the design process that we've talked about, and we can tailor that research to suit the client needs and budgets. If we pop to the next slide. For example, with content categorization, this is an activity that's done and carried out in a design workshop. And that's done at the early stages of the design process. So during the research, we always hear from users that the content is council focused and not people focused. So that's something that's definitely to do with, like, maybe the language perhaps. So for this activity, we ask users to label the pages on your site to create intuitive categories for your navigation. And we do this to create service categories on your website that are more intuitive to your users.
Exactly.
Do you have anything else you'd like to add about content categorization? Because you've got a lot of experience with this activity.
Yeah, I think you've pretty much summed it up there. But this is a really useful activity that you can do, as you say, right at the start of your redesign, so that you get your site navigation categories correct. So this is an example that you've got here, environmental health. So people often have this title for their category, environmental health, when it's not necessarily intuitive to the users. So find your bin day for a user. They're not, when they're thinking about, well, when's my collection day, they're not thinking environmental health, for example. So this activity is great to do, with real users. You can do it with your staff as well. But I think initially you want to do it with real users, and then you want to quantify that information with your staff, so your content experts. And this can be an ongoing thing. It's great to do it right at the start of the project, like we say, but you could do it at any point really to test that content. If you want to go to...
Yeah. So again, speaking about when to do user research, further along the design process at the wireframe or concept stage, we can use a user research method called A/B testing. Here we can test out two designs that are identical and save for, maybe except for one key element or interaction. And this method is used to really hone in and test on the usability of that key feature.
Yeah, so this is a good example. This is one we did with Newham Council. So you can see the pay, apply, report widget is in 2 different locations. So there was some talk within the project, both at Jadu Creative and internally at the council, about what the best position for that particular widget would be. So we actually tested this. So we had a set of user journeys where we were asking members of the public to do certain activities that would lead them to interact with these widgets. So there would be different ways they could interact with the site, as you would anyway. Someone might use the search, someone might use the menu, but the journeys were designed to make them want to use these. So the one on the bottom where the pay, apply, report is on the right-hand side, when we tested with that, nobody used it at all. So nobody used the widget in that position.
Yeah.
The other position at the top left there, 20% of all the users used it. So that was a good example of A/B testing and gave us clear results on how we could influence our design decisions. So that's quite a technical example. You guys listening, if you're not having redesign anytime soon, you can also do this sort of work with your content. So on your content pages, you could mock up a couple of different content pages, maybe with different layouts, different language used, all sorts of stuff like that. You could put it in front of users to get a bit of insight into how the best way that page can be digested, basically. So if you want to go to the next slide.
Yes, so building on that, we use eye tracking to evaluate the page layout and the content hierarchy. So this kind of builds on what you were talking about earlier, Jack. So you can see where a user's eye is going and what information they see first and the order in which they see it. So we can tailor the content or the particular widgets to guide the user's eye to what they need to find. Yeah.
And you can see on this one with the eye tracking, those purple circles represent the user's gaze. So where they were looking on the screen while they were performing the test for us. And you can see that at no point in this position, the users were sort of looking in that area. It was as though they couldn't see it. So the effectiveness of that widget in that position wasn't good. Could be a number of reasons why. Too close to the search box. Maybe people think it's part of the image. But yeah, we saw it was much more successful in the other position. So yeah, there's an example of the live site there for Newham. I think Rich talked about that earlier. It's one of our sites that went live during lockdown. So post-COVID, let's talk about how we're changing things we're doing. So we already touched on this a little bit earlier, but if you want to talk about how the pandemic is sort of changing things going forward for us at Jadu Creative from a research point of view, Jadine.
Yes, so kind of as we spoke about earlier, previously when we conducted user testing, we'd always be on site at the council offices or libraries using our own company laptops and equipment. Now we can do this work remotely. It will be an option for our work that we will be carrying on permanently, I think. And this has distinct benefits for accessibility. So previously, for our own option, our only option was to engage with users in person using our own devices, and our new remote service wasn't viable because of the potential technology barrier of things such as like video conferencing. People may not be used to using that, but as we've seen during this whole time that we've been in lockdown, that people are using video conferencing more, that they're able to access these kind of technologies. So with people being more familiar with platforms such as Zoom, this means that we can better engage with people that may have different disabilities and use different assisted technology, because they can now take part from home using their own technology. So we are in fact broadening our scope of people who we can test with.
Yeah, definitely.
Did you have something else to add there, Jack? On the
Sorry, that's just a really good point, because when we would test before in person, somebody that used assistive technology could be sort of ostracized from that, because even if we had a laptop and we loaded up a screen reader, maybe even the exact same screen reader that they use at home, we might not necessarily have all the settings exactly correct for how they use that. So it's very difficult to replicate that environment for them in our testing. But if they're at home, they've got their own machine, obviously that's not an issue. And as you say, everyone's used to Zoom now, or different platforms, so that's not a problem either. So it's actually a really good thing that's sort of opened our user testing up to the possibility of testing with disabled people a lot easier than before. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And we're also adapting our in-person user testing as government guidelines shift. For example, with eye tracking, we can now wear PPE and sanitize the laptops and surfaces after each use. And where we'd usually sit next to a participant during this test, we can sit at a suitable distance, such as 2 meters apart instead.
Yeah, exactly. They might feel more comfortable with that.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I think they would as well.
So if we want to go to the next slide, I think. Yes. So what could happen if you don't test with users? We've talked about this a little bit already as well. What do you think?
So I think as part of our process, there is always a degree of user testing done when we prepare for any design project. So we'd go in and review our analytics, just seeing how the users interact with your site, looking at different patterns and users' behaviors as they go through different journeys within your website. But in some cases, this may not be enough, as we only touch the surface on what we can find out and highlight some of the accessibility issues in your site. With different methods of user research, as we've mentioned before, we're able to really hone in on some of these issues in greater detail, gaining valuable insights and better understanding of your users. And through this, we're able to generate solutions that meet their requirements.
Yeah, definitely. I guess it's just all about trying to stop any issues like we saw with the audio tweet, any big surprises like that at go live, something you've not thought about, maybe no one in your organization has thought about, maybe we designed it for you and we didn't think about it. You really need to get this stuff in front of real people who are going to think about this stuff. Okay, perfect. So finally, Jadu, do you have any top tips for user research?
Yes, so I think a theme that's been running through our whole conversation, and what I'm going to highly recommend, is that you start with user research early in the discovery phase of a project, because understanding your users, like who they are and what happens when they interact with your service, is one of the most important parts of a project. And this way, when you move on to the design phase, you'll design with the user in mind. Yeah,
perfect. Okay, great. Thanks for that, Jadu. If we just want to go to the next slide, please. So we're going to talk about design, and we're going to talk to Ed. So Ed, you work very closely with Jadu and myself to take all of that UX research and sort of put it together into really visual, beautiful designs.
Yes, thanks, Jack. Yes, we do. So we have a system in place for the design process, which is the next slide. So after we have conducted a design workshop with a client, we typically gather all the research and data that we need. And the next step would be to visually communicate and interpret this through wireframes. So just like you see in a diagram, we've done the workshop, we then follow that up with a report or a write-up. We then move on to interpreting that into wireframes. And then also any iterations that are then needed in between. And then we move on to then design concept visuals and then through to extended designs. So you can see there's a whole journey that's happening here from the start to the middle to the end. And it's also at this stage where we spend some time to review the designs with the clients and also to go through any iterations to finalize the designs before it moves into, I guess, the further down the line, the prototype stage. And in addition to this, during this design process, there are also add-on services for our clients as well. So for example, like user testing or even eye tracking as well throughout this design process.
Yeah, perfect. So some of the stuff that Jadu was talking about there, that can fit in at different points during this design process. Okay, so it's cool. The next slide, please. So, okay, Braintree. So Braintree is one of your recent projects, Ed, that you've been working on. Can you tell us a bit about that project, please?
Yes, sure. Yeah, Braintree was a great project to work on. They had a great digital team there, and we worked closely with them, not only on creating good visual designs, but also designs that give their users a good user experience journey. So I think one point that I would like to talk about, and that is designing for accessibility. There's an assumption that adhering to all these guidelines restricts you from designing a great looking website. And that assumption can sometimes go as far as designs being possibly boring or a bit samey or ugly. But actually designing with accessibility in mind doesn't have to be this way. Okay, so next slide. We often see design trends that come and go, so that what we try to achieve is a design that is not only that it has longevity to live through these different design trends, but ultimately it tailors to the users as well. And so putting the user first, and that's what's most important. So we combine our user experience, functionality, accessibility, and good quality research alongside with good crafted designs. And that will lead us to a well-designed website. And this will pass all the requirements to ensure that the user will get the best possible experience. Okay, so sometimes we feel that accessibility guidelines are holding us back, or we may feel that we have to design within parameters. These are great design challenges that we're constantly exploring and solving problems, within our UX team to overcome these as well. So for Braintree, we managed to design a great looking website that also follows accessibility guidelines. We achieved this by doing user research, conducting design workshops, and also taking their analytics and data to then use design to resolve any issues or pain points that they may have or be experiencing. In fact, we have Jadu COVID-19 community podcast as well. And in episode 3, actually here, Braintree District Council discussed in this short podcast with Short Trust Accessibility Services on why accessibility didn't drop as a priority for its website redesign project during the pandemic, and also why accessibility has never been so important. So you can head over to the Jadu Creative website and look for our accessibility service page to access the podcast, or with the link on our slide that is shown here just now. It's definitely worth a listen if you have the time.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, you work very closely with Short Trust on this project with Braintree, which has just been great. Could you tell us a bit about what it was like working with them for yourself?
Yeah, sure. It was really, really good to work with Short Trust and have them on board on this project. I think just for context, for those who may be not familiar with Short Trust, they are a charity in the UK which helps disabled or disadvantaged people into employment and also into independent living. They are transforming the lives of 1 million young people and adults each year. So they're doing really fantastic work, and also such a large world-class organization to partner with. So for the project, Short Trust's involvement here was from an accessibility point of view, providing their expert assistance at a very early stage. And I feel this was a win-win situation for the client, as Jadu Creative and Short Trust's vision was aligned on what we wanted to achieve for Braintree. So to help them design and build a website that was compliant to WCAG 2.1 guidelines. Also, this partnership in working together allowed us to learn from SureTrust and to take any new findings and then to incorporate that into the designs. So one aspect that I really appreciate and love about SureTrust is that they have real native users on a day-to-day basis. And this assists the testing as well.
Oh, have we lost Ed? Ed, are you still there?
Yep.
I think he's rejoining.
Can you hear me now, Jack?
Just give him a moment. I think he was just mentioning about, oh, you back?
Yeah.
Sorry, we lost you there. You were just talking about the testers at SureTrust. I'm not sure if he's frozen again. Is he frozen for you guys as well, as it just me? What?
He's frozen for me.
What he was talking about.
Frozen. Yeah.
Okay.
I want to move on to the next section, Jack, and then try to.
Yeah, let's come back because. Okay, it leads on nicely anyway because he's talking about the testing, the testers they have at SureTrust. Sorry, so we could skip ahead and talk to Luke about testing now, and maybe we come back to Ed when he comes back. Sorry, you're getting to see all our slides now and see all our little surprises.
I'm ready.
Okay. You're ready. Great. So, a bit earlier than you thought. You had to.
Yes, that was. That's all right.
So you've got massive focus on accessibility in your role, Luke, which you'd imagine as a tester.
Yes.
So first thing, I guess we're talking about is the pandemic and COVID and all that stuff. So how has that sort of affected the way you test, if at all?
So the delivery on the projects hasn't really been affected at all, which is actually pretty good. Our projects haven't been impacted, but as everyone else, we are all working from home, which has its challenges. For a small example would be we used to be able to pass devices between us to test on easily. So we used to have the actual devices, whereas now we've had to distribute them between us. So we still have the devices to test on, but we can't use every single device. So what we're having to do is run like virtual testing environments. So Chrome has some built in, which we can use. But we're also just looking at other options. So recently, like we have like an iOS simulator, which we're starting to use, and an Android simulator. So we're trying to work out which one's the best that we can, that's like, I guess, closest to the actual device. So yeah, whilst we don't have them, there are options out there that we can use, which is good.
Yeah. I guess it's sort of quicker in a way as well. If you've got all the emulators on your machine, maybe you've got access to more different types of devices. So
yeah, no, that is true. Yeah, that is true. We do have, there are a lot on there, like with one of them, you can just add more devices. So if there isn't any other, I don't know, so maybe issues that arise on certain devices, we can probably just maybe grab them. But yeah, it's a lot quicker to use these.
Yeah. So what about assistive technology? So a screen reader, for example. So you use a screen reader when you're testing?
Yes, we test using assistive technology on every project that we have. Screen readers are basically read out web pages so that blind people and those with low vision can use the web. But there's a lot more to them than just reading out a page from left to right, top to bottom. Users can navigate in a lot of different ways.
Yes, I think we've got a quick video that we're going to show you to illustrate that. because that is something people think sometimes, that the screen reader just basically reads content straight down. But like you say, there's different ways they can navigate. So let's see if we can play.
Skip to content. Skip to navigation. Link. Form controls menu. Open site navigation. Skip to content. Skip to navigation. Skip to content. Skip to navigation. Link. Form controls menu. Open site navigation menu. Projects. Link. Projects. Jadu create. 56% loaded. Form controls menu. Headings menu. And Turkish Baths Harrogate. Turkish Baths Harrogate, a website to seduce the senses view project for Turkish Baths Harrogate. Link. Skip to content. Link. A website to seduce the senses. And 26 more items. Group. Main. Turkish Baths Harrogate. How do you bring to life a unique and breathtaking visitor attraction online? At the Turkish Baths Harrogate you can step back in time. Services. User experience. Link. Web design. Link. Development. Link. Eye tracking. Link. Site. View site. Turkish Baths Harrogate Co. UK. Link. Mobile homepage screenshot. Desktop homepage screenshot.
Okay, great. There we go. So that gives you a little quick idea of how a screen reader looks and sounds if you've never used one before. So that sort of shows how typically how users would navigate. Do you think, Luke?
Yes. So like I said, just reading from, it doesn't just read out from top to bottom. Users can navigate through titles, headings, images if they wanted to, links, and on the Mac at least, and I've seen it being used in JAWS, you have like I guess it's called like a rotor system, and on the Mac you can open it with Control, Option, and U when you've got the screen reader open, and you can have different options that you can go through, like I mentioned, so images, links, headings. There's quite a lot that you can go through, and the form controls. So it's not a matter of just going through each bit of text left to right. You can do it how you see useful.
Yeah. So we saw that in the video with the little box popped up, and it had like a list of headings, and then the person was like cycling through them. So that's like an example of them using the rotor. I think we've got a poll now as well, if we can launch the poll about screen readers. So I guess what we were talking about in the user testing session when I was saying that users might have their screen reader set up in a certain way. So an example of that could be the speed of voice, for example. So we heard when we listened to that example, it was at quite a steady pace, I think. But some users actually have it really sped up. And if you listen to it as someone that doesn't use a screen reader, you can't really tell what it's quite hard to understand. It's just because they're so used to it, the same way that a sighted person, when they're browsing a website, is just like sort of looking around really quickly, same sort of concept. So can I see the results of the poll? Let me have a look. Oh, okay. So 32% never, 30% no, but I have tried a screen reader. Occasionally 26%, so that's quite good, quite high. All the time, 6 people with 13%, excellent. Okay, so a bit of a spread there. For the some of those people, they're going to be well aware, the ones that are using the screen readers on their own machines. But Luke, could you tell us why you think it's so important, testing using a screen reader?
Yeah, I guess one of the obvious ones is we need to make sure that the sites that we design and build are usable for everyone. We don't want to limit any access to any particular disadvantaged or disabled person, and being able to access them is really good. And the code needed to make the site screen readable, accessible, is robust enough to mean that many other accessibility or accessible technologies will be accommodated as well. Yeah,
exactly. So stuff like voice activated software like Dragon. So Dragon, if you've not heard of it, it's software where you can basically speak to your computer and tell it what to do, like click on the button, click on the link, that sort of stuff. So the code that is used for Dragon to interpret a website is very similar to screen reader. So if you test with the screen reader, you're going to pick up a lot of dragging bugs as well. But Luke, you were telling me the other day you were looking at voice software on the Mac as well.
Yes, something that I've started to look at recently. I just need to get some more time to like properly understand it because there's a lot to it. But there's a voice control option that you can just turn on, and it's quite similar. So you get the option to, for example, show a grid, and that will draw a nice little grid on your screen, and then you could be say click 13, and it will just click on that square. You can do things like scroll up, scroll down. I'm sure there's plenty of other commands in there for like copy and pasting text. So yeah, it's just something that we need to look at. It's going to be quite nice. But yeah, it'll be similar to the other like technologies out there. It will work in a similar way.
Yeah, cool. It's good to sort of always, I guess, keep on top and start looking into new technologies and things like that as well. So I guess the big question for our clients at the councils testing using screen reader, it's mainly going to be the content, right? So should people test their content using screen readers, or is it enough that it's all in the templates?
It's not enough that it's just done in the templates. So things like if headings aren't properly formatted, that could fail an audit. Remember how we saw in the screen reader demo that you can flip between the headings? Yeah. This way, some screen reader.
If you go to the next slide, I think it's got an example of that as well. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. There we go. So yeah, as you can see here in the rotor, this is what this is showing is this is just the headings on the page, and if these weren't properly formatted, for someone with a screen reader, they might miss the content that they're looking for, or they might miss it if it's just not properly worded or something like that. So yeah, it is important that you do consider the way that you're writing the content. It is clear for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. It's about how your users are going to interact with your site, and if the person is using a screen reader, we know this is one of the key ways they interact with it, sort of cycling through headings and stuff like that. So it's really key that they're properly formatted, like you say, definitely. So you do this do you test like this for every Jadu design? You put the design all through the screen reader?
Yes, testing with a screen reader is done with every Jadu design that we get. So it'll be done on a template stage, and then throughout the build stage. So from the prototypes, we get in as early as possible. So hopefully, like if there's any issues there, we can iron them out. And then we do it again on the build stage just to make sure that it is still up to the standards that we want.
Yeah, actually, sometimes earlier as well. Because on the recent project, we brought you in on the design stage. We showed you some of the designs as well, didn't we? So you could get a test view on that as well.
Yeah.
So could you tell me a bit more about your whole testing process for accessibility?
Yeah, so we've got a thorough testing process that covers everything to make a site AA compliant at the point of release when it goes out. The process includes things like we will test the color contrast, and with the new 2.1 standards, there's a lot more to color contrast now rather than just text on a background. So we'll check things like borders against the background, text against the background still. So there's more into that. And what we've just been talking about, screen readers, mobiles, browsers, we do tabbing, things like that. We need to make sure that is all up to the standards that it needs to be. And like I mentioned, when we test with the prototypes, testing as early as possible can just help build general quality into the final result.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. And what are some of the first things that you sort of look for, I guess, when you're testing?
Yeah, there's a couple of areas as a testing team that we know we can get some nice tickets for our UXers over there just by running some tools. Because it just flags issues quickly, and if anything, some of the tools, they don't necessarily, I guess, raise issues, but they bring us to awareness. So things like some of them will pick up on color contrast, so it's like, oh, okay, we know to just make sure that is actually okay, because some of them do bring like false positives or false negatives, I think it is. That we can just look at it, and looking at it, we know that it's not an issue, but it's still worth running the tool because it just it speeds up processes, and it just generally helps us. So there's areas which will always have issues that were designed prior to the 2.1 standards that have come out. Color contrast, for example, this is because prior to the 2.1 set of rules, those tests didn't exist. The design team weren't considering them, and neither were the testing team. But now that we're aware of these new standards, every project that like forward we know about, so they're going to meet the new standards. But anything that went live before 2019, these may have these 2.1 issues in. So yeah, there's those.
So next slide, we've got a nice picture of Luke here. And some of the members of our team, Heather, Christine, and Abby are there as well. So yeah, so this is where you actually went to Short Trust offices where they all work and saw a bit about what they do. And as we're on screen readers, we'll talk about the screen reader user. So you met a screen reader user when you visited the Short Trust there. What was it like to sort of meet a real person that uses this technology?
It was like amazing. Like everyone there that we met, they showed us a lot and they helped us like understand. I guess they made things a lot clearer for us there, and like, just the whole team there was just so kind and everything for us. It was great. But for screen readers, we spoke with Alan, and the image I believe is on the left. And yeah, it was amazing seeing him use the screen reader. He was using JAWS, which is a Windows screen reader. And I've never met anyone that uses this technology before. And yeah, watching him use it just blew me away. The way he introduced it, when we first sat down with him, I think it was one of the sites, I believe it was Rotherham, but he was going through the site with his monitor turned off, which for us it was like we couldn't see, but like watching him use the technology, like he was just navigating around the page and he was doing it like just effortlessly almost. But yeah, just like watching him do that. But then when you turn the monitor on, we could see the amount of options that the screen reader has and the way he was using it, and that was just eye-opening for us. We just didn't, I guess, think in that way. For someone that we use the technology, we would make sure things are being read out as they are, which is good. But watching him use that, yeah, it was just blew us away. It was amazing.
I guess it makes a big difference seeing that real sort of human connection and how he uses it. You sort of answered this, but my next question was, why do you think it's important to involve the real users like Alan?
Yeah. So yeah, the team that we've got at Jadu Creative, we're all experienced with using screen readers and other accessibility technology, but there's just things that we wouldn't think of as being a problem, like I mentioned. I mean, more usability issues than bugs, ways that we can make a site better. Yeah. So I guess having users with disability brings things to light that we might not think of, and it can just make a site a lot more user friendly, which is nice.
Definitely. Could you talk about some of the insights, because I know there's things that we've added to the process, on both design and testing process, based off of your insights from that visit. So could you tell us a bit about those?
Yeah, so we'd usually go through a web page, making sure things are read out correctly, like I mentioned. But after seeing Alan use the screen reader, we made some adjustments to how we test. Alan would use his screen reader tools to go through headings and links, missing content altogether. So, like I mentioned, we would probably go through the content, whereas Alan, the way he was doing it is he was just using the headings. So he was skipping out the chunks of content altogether. So that's why, like we mentioned earlier, it's important that the headings that you put on the web page, they all make sense and they are clear. And I think one of the biggest ones for us that we were kind of like yeah, it just makes sense to do something that way. It was the text fields. So like a form, when you're filling out a form, you have the help text. So for us, help text below a form field, it was there. Like we could read it out and it would just be fine. But say you're using a screen reader, you're going to read out the question for the form, like name, for example. You're going to put in your name, but then if it's the help text below tells you to use certain things or not include certain characters, you've already done that. So then you're going to have to go back. It's just going to be a bit more difficult for you. So since meeting with Alan, like having that being pointed out, we've adjusted where the help text will show. So now on like future projects, it's going to show above the text field. So read out the question, then the help text. At least that way, anyone using the assistive technology they're going to have that help before they actually fill out the question. It just made sense. It just clicked, I guess, when we were looking at it, like, yeah, why are we doing it this way?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And when you told us about that, that's something we've put in, like you say, to the design template. So all projects going forward, we're going to do that. And it's a real good example of, like you said, it's usability. It's not a bug. So if you were doing a report that sort of was strictly following WCAG, something like that might not be picked up because it's not strictly a fail. But it's a usability problem. It's not good for Alan. So, and that's really what you're doing these designs for, people that are using it, not to sort of do the checklist of pass or fail. It's about usability. So I think that's really good feedback. So finally, do you have any more tips for accessible testing that you can pass on to our attendees?
Yeah, just I guess a couple of easy ones. So you've got the free tools that are out there to help you get started, but that you can run the free tools. They just help give a quick scan of a website, like your color contrast or landmarks and things like that. But I think the most important thing is to look into the areas that you don't have much knowledge on and expand from there. So, for example, if you don't know much about screen readers, try using one. Learn why the assistive technology is so important for others, or maybe try using just a keyboard for a day and see how easy you find it. You begin to see why it's so important that we get these things right. And yeah, just using a keyboard would be the easiest one to tab through everything that you do for the day. You'll see why we do what we do. It's good.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Some great tips there that I think people can definitely take away and sort of put into their workflow. Shall we try? Is Ed? Are you back now? Could we try and go back to your bit? Is Ed there now? Oh, yeah.
Everyone for the loss of connection there. I think the connection is now a little bit better, more stable. So fingers crossed. So if we rewind back to slide 32, fantastic.
Okay, so we were talking about SureTrust. We've learned a lot about SureTrust now from Luke as well. So excellent organization. So where were we at, Ed? Sorry.
Yeah, so I believe I just introduced SureTrust, and I'm just going to continue to tell you a little bit more about our joint working partnership with them. So for this project that we're working for with Braintree, SureTrust's involvement was from an accessibility point of view, providing their expert assistance at a very early stage. And I feel this was a win-win situation for the client, as Jadu, creative and SureTrust vision was aligned to achieve the same thing for Braintree, which is to help them design and build a website that was compliant to WCAG 2.1 guidelines. So this joint partnership in working together allowed us to learn from SureTrust and to take any new findings and to incorporate that into the designs. One aspect I liked about them was that they have real native users on a day-to-day basis, and this assists the testing. So this is really valuable as it gives us really good quality feedback. And by taking what we've learned, we then have the challenge of creating the visuals, but also designing it in a way that will be easy and also intuitive enough to use for the users. Yeah. So all in all, having Shaw Trust on board, it gives our designs even more credibility, and it can also reassure users that we are not only working with some of the best charity organizations in the world.
Cool. So, okay, the pandemic as well. So a lot of that work with Braintree and Shaw Trust, it was ongoing during the pandemic, but a lot of bulk of the design work, I guess, was done before things got bad. So could you, how do you see the pandemic affecting design work?
Yeah, I think one thing we're learning really quickly is that everyone's behavior has changed during the pandemic. And I believe this new and evolving behavior will remain for the next few years. And yes, there is no doubt that this is a design as well. One behavior that we see is that people who used to go to their local council office to access services or used to go in and ask queries have typically changed during this pandemic. So no one can actually go and physically visit the council offices now. So we see that the shift has moved to digital. This means that those who are maybe not familiar with using the council's website have had to adapt to accessing the services online. And because of the pandemic, they also have no other choice but to use the website. So with the website being the only way of access to their local council and its services, this is really important for design. That considerations for user journeys and user experience has been well thought out so that we have designed a website that communicates well and also puts the users first. So if there is a council service that exists by only accessing the council office building, considerations need to be made for the existing service to work online. Also factoring in the simplicity of designs, making it easily accessible is really, really important. So this is why we take accessibility so seriously. Our designs are inclusive, and we take the utmost effort to make our websites equally accessible by all. And last thoughts on it, I guess, is I think this pandemic has definitely been a wake-up call for maybe some brands or even that have far-reaching audiences or local councils or any government-serving website, that if they haven't already, to take accessibility seriously and to make sure that their websites are compliant with the latest WCAG 2.1 guidelines, so that everyone can equally access their websites and have a really good experience in using it.
Definitely. I think you're completely right there, Ed. And I think the pandemic sort of shines a light on that, because a lot of people, like you say, they're cut off from face-to-face services, but well, everyone is in the pandemic. So your online offering has to be, and your user journeys have to be there. They have to be good. But a lot of other stuff that we design accessibly for people are going through. You know, there's a lot of people that are very sick. There's a lot of people that are under a lot of stress at the minute, a lot of cognitive load. All of that stuff that we design for with accessibility in mind is going to benefit people anyway. But I think we're sort of running out of time here. I know you had a bit more that you wanted to talk about the themes work that we've been doing, but I know Rich mentioned that in the keynote as well. So I think we're sort of coming towards the end of our time. Is there anyone should we have a look at a quick question before we go? We've got a couple of minutes. Let's have a look at the questions. Is there any questions that we can quickly answer for people before we go? And then other questions, maybe what we'll do is we'll have a look and we can send them out via email. Oh, I need to click on Q&A. Okay, the first one I can sort of see here is about embedded maps. How have you typically approached accessibility around user journeys that include embedded maps? That's a good question, and maps always comes up for accessibility because there's such. I don't think there's an accessible map solution in the world, to be honest, that is perfect. It's something that's it's a very visual thing. So a lot of the accessible considerations you make with other types of visuals are difficult to apply to an interactive map. The way we tend to tackle it is to have all of the content that is within the map accessible in another way. So maybe if you have a list of, let's say, libraries within the interactive map that you can zoom in and click on, below it you have a table with all the library information and all the information that is within the map, so location, etc. You want to have that by another means as well, because, as I say, there's not really any way to make interactive maps accessible at the moment. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add on that.
No, I think you mentioned it. I know we've done it on a couple of recent projects at least. It's like you mentioned that you've got the map there, but being able to interact with it has always been a problem. So it's making sure that you can actually interact with it in like an alternative way. And at least that way, if anyone is struggling with the map, they've also got the alternative option, which is always good.
Yeah, definitely. I think that applies to other things as well. And if you're in doubt, if you have some interactive function or something maybe from a third party you're not sure about whether or not it's accessible, then that's always a good approach to take. Just have it in another form on the site somewhere. Okay, so I think we're sort of running over now. We only answered one question, but what we'll try and do is get an email out to the attendees with some of the other questions. So yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody for attending and listening to us. I hope you found it useful. I hope some of the tips you can take away and you'll be able to use your day-to-day work and make your websites more accessible for members of the public. So thanks a lot for watching, everybody.